Story 1. Rollover accident with a car landing right next to mine. The man lost his head from the force of the whiplash. He landed on the road in front of my car. Story 2. When I was 6 years old, 62 now, I was with my family on a car vacation from Maryland to California to visit relatives. Dad was driving, Mom was the front passenger, and in the back seat were me, male 6, my sister, female 11, and my brother, male 13. We were 50 miles from home, taking a ramp off the interstate when an upper ball joint in the front suspension failed, causing the steering wheel to spin uncontrollably, breaking 3 of my father's fingers. The car flipped and traveled about 60 feet on its roof. I remember climbing out of the broken rear window and standing in the rain with my siblings while my dad tried frantically to get my mom out of the car. I will never forget him screaming her name. She had been crushed and died instantly. They had been married for almost 25 years at that point. All these years later, that night remains clear in my memory, much as I wish it would not. Story 3. I have seen many disturbing things, but what affected me the most was the aftermath of my 4-year-old niece's sexual assault. It was committed by an adult cousin and his wife. She developed intermittent explosive disorder for a short time. I stayed with my sister during this period to help, and the outbursts were very intense. She would scream loudly, scratch her arms and face, throw things, and at one point, I saw her choking herself. She did not know how to cope with the pain it caused her. She was terrified, confused, and hurt. We got her into therapy immediately, and the intermittent explosive disorder resolved after a few months. Saying it was traumatizing is a major understatement. After years of fighting, the cousin was finally convicted and sentenced to 45 years. We are still working on convincing the district attorney to issue a warrant for the wife. Story 4. Saw a man's arm get ripped off in a construction-related accident. I didn't know bones leaked fluid when they snapped. Story 5. A multi-fatality car accident occurred. A reckless teenager was speeding midday, ran a red light, and T-boned a van with 5 children and a woman inside. I was the first on the scene and called emergency services. It was horrifying. I had to throw my shoes away because they smelled of gasoline. I initially thought it was only gasoline flowing on the ground, but quickly realized, while assessing the scene with emergency dispatch, that it was blood as well. 2 of the little girls had been thrown from the back window and had landed face down on the concrete. It was clear they had passed away, but I checked for pulses anyway. 2 adult men stood there recording, and I had to ask them to help me pull one of the other children out of the overturned van. I strongly dislike people who record tragedies instead of helping. It was so awful. I was in shock for weeks afterward. I didn't know it was possible to feel numb and grief-stricken at the same time. I lost who I used to be. I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't know how emergency medical technicians do it. Story 6. My ex-partner and father of my daughter killed a young woman and brought her to my house in the boot of his car to show me. He thought if he showed me what he had done, I would help him and give him money to leave town. He was going up North Queensland and was going to throw her body in the river to the crocodiles. He had stabbed her about 30 times in her stomach and chest area. She was curled up in a blanket in the boot of his car. To this day, I can see her, smell the blood, and wish I had never looked, but I did not believe him. I told him I was going inside to get some money, but I went inside and called the police. I told them not to use sirens or lights because he had always said he would have a siege before going back inside. To their credit, they responded immediately without using lights or sirens. By that point, I had walked outside. As the car rolled around the corner, I saw him see the police. He ran, so they jumped out, chased him, caught him, and threw him on the ground at gunpoint while they held me and asked what was going on. He is now serving a life sentence in prison, which is 25 years here in Queensland. Since being in prison, he has stabbed another prisoner and received more time. He loves jail and the people inside. Some things never change. The young woman he killed was only 26 and had 2 young children. I paid for her funeral and told her family what had happened so they would know the truth. There were many awful rumors going around that were not true. She did not do anything wrong and did not deserve any of that. I wanted her family to know what happened and I apologized to them. Everyone in town knows what happened, and many still gossip and give me side eyes. I do not care because I know I did the right thing. I did not want her to be thrown to the crocodiles and have her family never know what happened to her. So yes, the town calls me a snitch and I am okay with that. That is not what keeps me up at night. Story 7. I watched my son die in front of me a week before his second birthday. Stage 4 neuroblastoma. A heart attack occurred when they switched from chemotherapy to radiation. I watched a team of doctors and nurses try to resuscitate him before we had to call it. Story 8. I saw a lot of horror in the emergency room where I used to work. Number 1 was a child abuse case. There was also a mother who was intoxicated and brought in custody. She was driving with her baby in the car and crashed. The baby was unrestrained, just lying in the seat next to her. I will spare the details of how exactly the baby died, but it was terrible. The most disturbing part was that the mother was not being told what happened. Law enforcement instructed everyone not to say anything because she is going to flip out when she finds out, and we would rather she do it after she is locked up in a cell. This woman did something horrible, something unforgivable. You want to hate someone like that, but it is different when you see her pain firsthand, begging us to tell her anything about her daughter, pleading to see her. The only thing anyone would tell her was, "They are working on her." Can you imagine that? That woman was living an episode of The Twilight Zone where she knew that something was deeply wrong, but everyone just kept repeating, "They are working on her." My heart hurt for everyone. For that poor baby, but for her too. She was still human, and I was witnessing her pain in front of me. Yes, she was responsible, but she was still a mother who lost a child. I know what she did was horrible, but it is sad that it ever got that far and that she could not get help. I was sad for the hurt she would feel when she found out what she did. That is a horror I cannot imagine. A lot of complicated feelings. There was also a man who drove himself to the emergency room after he killed his wife. Chief complaint: killed wife. Not kidding. He had some cuts from the altercation and wanted them tended to before he went to jail. He asked us to call the police for him. He just wanted stitches first. He did not shed a tear. Some of the coldest behavior I have ever seen. Story 9. Busy downtown Washington, D.C. Lunchtime. Screaming and some crashing noises. 2 thumps. A lady screaming. His head came off. His head came off. Running by the diner. I go out to a huge, stopped crowd. Purely not a sound. Car crashed into another, I see. Okay, is that it? Then in the street, a dead man, his leg lying next to him. His leg came off. The lady was screaming. I heard it as head. I think I am in shock. Not processing much, just gawking. Maybe 2 minutes into the scene, I see another man 30 feet down, dead in the gutter. His blood stopped now coagulating but clearly flowed down the street rain gutter to the sewer. Initially, the eerie silence of 100, 200 people on a busy metropolitan street saying nothing or speaking in hushed whispers resonated with me and made it worse. The next day from the newspaper, this was the 1990s, I am old as hell for Reddit. I learned a man behind the wheel had a medical emergency of some kind, flew through a red light and hit the 2 men in the crosswalk. Best work buddies out to lunch, one just got married. Killed them instantly. A particularly grisly scene even for experienced emergency workers, according to the Washington Post. They offered us counseling in the buildings around there. I didn't really think it bothered me that much. I didn't take the counseling. I didn't think I needed it. But I kept the clipping from the Washington Post and run across it every few years. I still remember every detail. Every chance I get, I tell someone about it. Every time I can shoehorn it in, like now, I type out a description about it. It is weird as hell. It sits with me. I should have taken the counseling 100%. Story 10. In 2000, I played in a band. We were just a typical high school punk rock band. We had a friend who owned a public address system and said we could borrow it. He told us to come over on Saturday and grab it from his garage. He had to work but said that his parents knew we were coming and to walk in. He had died by suicide, and he didn't want his family to find him. Myself and two friends opened the side door to the garage, and he was hanging there. His eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. I couldn't process what I was looking at, and my friends couldn't either. We just stood there. No one said anything for what felt like minutes, though it was probably seconds. One friend said something like, "He's joking, yeah?" He ran out and got his mom. That was a poor decision in retrospect. We should have called emergency services and kept his mom out of the garage. I still think about this every now and then. Story 11. My older brother was naked in a bathtub full of blood. Dad and stepmom were out of town for Valentine's Day. I was staying at my boyfriend's house when I received a strange call from my brother, basically saying goodbye. I rushed home and found him. I called emergency services and was left to deal with the aftermath. I scrubbed the blood from the tub and the walls and had a meltdown when I found pieces of his skin in the drain. I was 17 years old and couldn't sleep for weeks. Thankfully, he survived. Story 12. Watching one of my parents succumb to dementia was a slow and brutal decline, and I had a front row seat as one of her caregivers. Story 13. My brother had muscular dystrophy and died in the middle of the night. I had woken up with the urge to check on him. You could see that he struggled and was trying to get up or call for help, but he could not. I can see him so clearly in my mind. It breaks my heart to know he died scared and alone. Story 14. When I was younger, attending many raves and using drugs, I remember watching a woman overdose in front of me and get her head trampled by the crowd. She convulsed, foamed at the mouth, exhibited abnormal posturing, and then died right there on the spot. Her eyes rolled back but remained open, and I remember seeing her take a stomp to the face. That is probably the most disturbing image I will never forget. Story 15. My 4-month-old died. The hospital told me to hold my baby, so I would not believe she was still alive somehow. Story 16. What a grenade thrown into a small room with 4 people does to them. This was 8 years ago, and I am still in therapy and barely sleep. Story 17. One of my best friends died in a snowmobile accident when we were 16. He was decapitated in the accident. I was very upset, and someone took me to the place where it happened. I found his blood all over. Nobody had bothered to cover it up with snow, so I did it. It was one of the hardest times and lowest points in my life. Story 18. When I was 13, we were driving into town for groceries. My mom got a weird feeling, so she pulled over to the side of the road. A car came around the blind curve we were at and got caught in the shoulder gravel. The driver did not know how to correct. The car flipped and rolled 3 times. Between the second and third rotations, the driver came flying out of the side window. A half-second difference either way would have meant instant death. The car would have hit us head-on as it flipped and rolled, if not for my mom's weird feeling and pulling over and stopping. I jumped out and ran to help the driver. It was my cousin. The other 2 girls were people I knew from school. I'll never forget trying to get my cousin to remain still and stop walking around from shock as we waited for the first responders. The shoulder that hit the pavement was destroyed. She asked me how it looked. I lied and said not bad, but I'll never forget the sight of the jagged bones sticking out through the flesh of her shoulder. They were lucky that on a lonely country road, their crash happened less than 100 meters from a doctor's house, and he came running to help us help them. None of the 3 died, but all were left with life-altering injuries from the crash that the doctor helped to mitigate. Wear seatbelts. Wear your seatbelt. Story 19. I walked into the room at 8 years old the moment someone was ending their own life. This was over 35 years ago, and I can still smell the gunpowder in the air and see the puddle of blood on the floor. It is as if those few seconds are burned into my brain like a 3-dimensional experience moving in super slow motion. I wish mental health had been thought about in the 1980s as it is today. My life probably would have turned out very differently if I had received help as a child to process those emotions and experiences. Story 20. I was cleaning out stalls at a horse barn, and when I went to drop a wheelbarrow load on the manure pile, I found a yearling colt from a farm a few kilometers away. He was lying on his side in the manure pile, barbed wire wrapped around his chest and front legs. Both front legs had been flayed down to the bone in some places, and his chest was torn. He was breathing hard, covered in sweat and blood. For as long as I live, I will never forget the look in his eyes, the pain and the fear. What happened was that the people living next door to the farm had gotten into a squabble with the horse's owner about their dogs running loose, getting into the field, and chasing the horses. The horse owner finally called animal control on them, and in retaliation, the dog owners waited until the horse owner left and then let their dogs loose on the horses. Another neighbor finally noticed what was happening, but it was too late. Out of 16 horses, 2 were killed outright by the dogs, young foals that had their throats ripped out. Another 6 had to be put down, including the one I found who had run over 2 kilometers with his legs wrapped in barbed wire. The rest all had injuries to some extent. Story 21. The random 11 p.m. group text from my uncle saying, "Everybody pray," with no context, followed by news the next day that my 14-year-old cousin had hung himself and left no note. I cannot even imagine what was going through my uncle's head as he sent those words. He was a great kid. I will never be able to wrap my head around it. Story 22. A cat trying desperately to wake up its friend who had just been hit and killed in the middle of the road after both cats ran from their owner's front door. It really seemed like it just did not understand. Story 23. There is more that isn't coming to mind right now. I saw 2 young boys attacked by feral dogs and had flesh bitten off their arms, necks, thighs, and backs. Degloved fingers. Saw 2 men in a stack catch the same bullet from a sniper. The first man had it go between his radius and ulna. The second man had it shatter his radius and ulna and lodge in his ribcage. Lots of blood. Saw a lieutenant standing by a spent illumination round. Then it exploded, improvised explosive device wired afterward, and the man was gone. Like he hadn't just been standing there. Gone. Saw a man catch a round that severed his urethra and basically caused a penile amputation on the battlefield. He put his manhood in his pocket and got his gun back up. Had to try to treat my battle buddy after he ate his barrel in a bunker midway through deployment. That sucked. Lied to his little brother that he passed peacefully. A man had a cyst exacerbated by his Kevlar, so he came into the aid station to have it lanced and drained. The battalion surgeon injected local anesthetic. A couple of minutes went by, and the man started having breathing problems. We didn't know he was allergic to lidocaine. He ended up having a full seizure and lost bladder and bowel control. It got stressful quickly. Lots of blood and horror in Afghanistan. Never again. Story 24. Witnessing the sheer and unadulterated terror and grief the parents of Columbine students experienced at the staging area. I will never forget it. Story 25. When I graduated nursing school, I started out in cardiac telemetry. I had admitted an 89-year-old man from the emergency room who came in with heart attack symptoms and elevated cardiac enzymes, which is indicative of a heart attack. I called the cardiologist on call multiple times throughout the night because every time I redrew cardiac enzyme labs, they continued to worsen. Additionally, no medicine I gave him helped his chest pain. The cardiologist continued to say okay and that he would evaluate him in the morning. Eventually, my telemetry monitor went off and alerted me that he was having a cardiac event. At the same time, an aide came out of the room, obviously shaken, and said, "I think he's gone." I ran in and he was in cardiac arrest and had a purple-blue shade that I hate thinking about. We started CPR, called a code blue, and got people to work on him. For about 45 minutes, we ran this code, breaking ribs and trying to get a heartbeat back. When someone attempted to intubate him, only blood came back, and they could never get the right placement for the tube despite several attempts. The emergency room doctor called it, everyone left, and I was left with this poor man and blood everywhere. Next, I was left to call hospice and family. He had an estranged son I could not reach, but had a next-door neighbor who looked after him. I called her and informed her of his passing. As a newer nurse, it just broke me. We cried on the phone together for a bit, and that was that. What sealed the deal for me leaving that particular unit at that hospital was when that shift was over, I just sat in the nurse's station and cried. My manager came in and jokingly asked in front of both day and night shifts during shift change, "What the hell did you do to that guy?" I lost it even more and had to go to the break room. He followed me and apologized, but I was over it and the other issues of the unit. I still think of that patient. I also still think of that manager. Story 26. Sitting with my best friend and ex-fiancé after his esophageal varices ruptured in the hospital and they took him off life support. They cleaned him up a bit for me, but it was obvious that he had bled everywhere, and blood was still leaking from his mouth and nose. Watching his vital signs decline after they stopped the medications to raise blood pressure and ventilation made me panicky and so nauseous I thought I was going to throw up, but I refused to let him die alone. This was in late March and I still haven't really unpacked that trauma. Story 27. A man was riding his four-wheeler down our road without a helmet and was clotheslined by a deer. I held his brain in until medical air transport arrived to take over. He died the next morning, but he was able to say goodbye to his family because of what I did for him that night. Story 28. When I was a child, I saw my neighbor's house burn down with their pets inside. The screams of the dogs still haunt me. Fire is terrifying. Story 29. I was working at Federal Express on offload in 2017. A new coworker, an older lady in her 60s, ended up being dragged under the outrigger of the Boeing 777 loader. I was checking my dolly locks, turned around, watched the loader pulling around, and suddenly saw a smear of blood on the concrete. I did not immediately understand what I was seeing, so I stepped forward a bit. Then it hit me. It was horrifying. I saw one of my team leaders running at full speed after the loader, screaming at the driver to stop. The worst part is, the driver of the loader had no visibility of the woman. With how wide the deck is and where the control cab was located, he could not see her. His guide person should have seen her. I have no idea how he did not notice her. I will never forget that awful, messy streak. What angered me about this whole incident, besides the guide person missing her, was the loader itself. It is a specially built Commander 30 loader for loading Boeing 777 freight planes. The outrigger is on the right side, unlike the standard placement on the left side. The cab where the controls are located was on the left side, out of sight of the outrigger. That is the incorrect placement for the cab. On the standard Commander 30 loaders, the outrigger is on the left side with the cab. It is designed this way because, as freight containers come off the plane and the operator lowers the bridge, they can easily see the containers as they move them onto the outrigger. This special loader was configured incorrectly. The driver in the cab had no way of seeing the woman on the ground near the outrigger. Story 30. My 90-year-old mother died, and when I saw her body, she had not been prepared for the funeral. I told myself she would look bad, but I was still horrified when I saw her. She looked awful, and one of her eyes was still open, looking my way as I walked in. This was even worse because she had been an unpleasant person, and I had not seen her in years. Felt like she pulled one last sick trick by looking so horrible. Story 31. I saw a cat run across the street and get hit by a car. It immediately started convulsing violently. It jumped up several times, spinning around and doing wild backflips, as if it were trying to run away, but its body wasn't working properly. It looked like a broken marionette being tossed around. This went on for about 5 or 6 seconds. The cat screamed the whole time, making an awful, desperate sound. Then another car hit it and ended its suffering. Story 32. My ex-girlfriend pulled a small handgun out of her purse in her car when it was just the two of us. She pointed the loaded gun at me first, then put it to her temple and shot herself. It took me 25 years to somewhat get over it. I will never forget those 30 seconds. Story 33. When I was 8 years old, I was with my mother driving through an agricultural area, and we heard yelping from the brush on the side of the road. My mother stopped to check, and it was 8 newborn puppies sealed in a black trash bag. We saved them and got them all adopted, keeping one. I named him Sydney. Story 34. My pet dog Scooter died in my arms last summer. He had a collapsed trachea, and there was nothing I could do. He basically choked to death. I am still saddened by it and miss him every day. Story 35. I found a woman trying to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation on her husband after hearing screams for help in the neighborhood. I pushed her aside. The man was easily twice her size and did it. The color of his skin, blue to purple, and the screams of the woman while I performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation were the most haunting things I have ever experienced. After 10 to 15 minutes, rescue units arrived. The man was worked on for another 30 to 45 minutes until they could get him into a somewhat transportable state. He spent 2 weeks in an induced coma and had an implanted defibrillator. He did not have any side effects other than some problematic short-term memory. He made a basically full recovery after being unresponsive for almost an hour. I have never been more proud of myself, especially considering how haunting the experience was. Story 36. I've seen it all as a retired X-ray technician who primarily worked in the emergency room. I also occasionally received orders from the morgue. What has been seen cannot be unseen. To provide an example, I took X-rays of a deceased toddler to rule out abuse, neglect, or murder. It was very disturbing. Story 37. A man riding a Harley-Davidson motorcycle was sideswiped by a car. He was not wearing a helmet. I arrived shortly after and witnessed him die in the ditch beside the road. It was a gruesome scene. Story 38. I saw an elderly woman get dragged and crushed by an 18-wheeler. Years ago, someone sent me a video that cut out partway through and showed someone stepping on the eye of a puppy with a stiletto heel with sound. This happened just because I was a moderator of a subreddit. It is upsetting that they succeeded, and it still haunts me years later. Story 39. Infants dying in intensive care alone. Their parents gave up on them because something was wrong. Thoughts go to those children and the healthcare workers who see it all too often. I am not in healthcare. Story 40. When I was 13, my dad bought me my first drum kit from a friend of my aunt. On our way home, we were waiting to turn right at a T-intersection. A car came from the right and turned left in front of us, then got T-boned on the passenger side by a car coming from the left. My dad and I got out and the guy behind us got out. They both ran to the car that got hit. The other guy opened the driver's side back door, and a body fell onto the pavement. My dad turned to me and told me to get back in the car. Eventually, police and emergency medical technicians came. My dad backed up the car and moved it out of the way of the crash site, but I watched everything unfold as he and the guy behind us spoke with the police. There was blood and broken glass everywhere. I watched from afar as the paramedics covered the body with a sheet. We left shortly after, and my dad cried most of the ride home. In addition to seeing that, it was almost just as horrible to see the driver of the car that got hit realize what happened to his passenger. Story 41. I was talking with this guy at the gas station where I worked. He seemed like a decent person. He was just $1 short of getting a pack of cigarettes. I covered him because if anyone could use a cigarette, it was this guy. We shared a few jokes back and forth. He thanked me for helping him, and I said no problem and wished him a good rest of the day. He walked out to the grass and smoked a cigarette. Then he looked both ways about to cross Old River Road. He looked both ways a couple of times, then stepped out right in front of a Peterbilt truck fully loaded with aluminum coils from Alcoa. The truck never even touched its brakes. It was a tragic accident. The man's shoes were left where he stood. It was one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen. I've witnessed a lot, though. Story 42. I was 18, barely experienced with women. I was walking up some subway stairs when an old homeless woman came down. She lifted her skirts, revealing that she had no underwear. She was filthy, very hairy, and smelled horrible. Fully exposed. She lifted her leg so her vulva was just a few feet from me, then started to urinate with such force and length that I had to jump out of the way to avoid being hit. I am nearly 70 now, and that moment remains imprinted in my memory. Story 43. I worked at a factory making tractor transmissions. We would remanufacture transmissions occasionally. The parts had to go through a cleaner consisting of 2 wire brushes to strip off the old paint. A man got his flannel shirt caught, and it stripped his forearm down to the bone. One Friday afternoon, we were driving on a 4-lane highway to our cabin. The car in front of us swerved, crossed lanes, flipped, and both occupants were ejected. They landed on a barbed wire fence, hanging there. Story 44. My brother shot himself. I held his brain that was leaking from the entry and exit wounds while screaming the loudest I ever have for my parents. I can still remember the smell and tactile sensation 10 years later. Story 45. Not me, but my mother. She was at a train station, standing and waiting for the train. A man ran past her and jumped in front of a speeding train. He ricocheted off the front corner, flew through the air, and landed on my mother. He was already dead. Story 46. A mother and her son were crossing the street when they were hit by a woman who was on her phone while running a red light. It happened 19 years ago. The sound of the impact and the mother screaming as she got up and limped or ran to her son still haunts me. Story 47. A good friend's body lay under the sheet after a drunk driver hit him as he was crossing the street in front of his house. He was 9 years old. Story 48. I saw a rather tall man outside the pub where I work. He had only had one drink and then passed out, falling backward and hitting his head on a concrete corner, which fractured the back of his skull. The manager called emergency services, and paramedics arrived quickly. A nurse, who was off duty and having a drink, provided first aid immediately, followed by CPR. The paramedics managed to revive him and took him to the hospital. He was still alive, but I would bet my life savings that he suffered severe brain damage. The most horrific part was the sound and seeing the large pool of blood beneath him, which we had to clean up after he was taken to the hospital. What was even more disturbing was everyone else carrying on as if a man wasn't dying on the doorstep. People trying to walk around him to get in, people ordering drinks while we were on the phone with emergency services, and people complaining about not being served. I lost a lot of faith in humanity that day. Story 49. I saw a dismembered man near a highway. He had no legs and no head. The police were already there, and no other cars were in sight, so it did not look like an accident. It was around 7 a.m. on a busy highway. My guess is the body was dumped there. It was possibly cartel-related. Story 50. Seeing my mother in an induced coma. Her feet and hands were swollen, purple, and cold. I grabbed her hands and tried to warm them up. Still to this day, I cannot get that image out of my head. It has been 4 years since my mother died. It is the most traumatic thing I have seen. Story 51. For my military brothers and sisters, we have witnessed some of the most brutal and horrific events imaginable, things we only discuss with one another. Remember, you are not alone. Reach out and seek help. Those of us who have walked this path will be there when you call. Story 52. Unfortunately, probably my father's body. He died unexpectedly. I know everyone says nice things about people when they die, but he was a great dad and a great person. It is very sad. Story 53. I worked on a cardiac critical care unit and witnessed some intense situations. Esophageal varices perforating immediately comes to mind. So much blood in so little time. Watching people slowly suffocate with coronavirus disease in the early days of the pandemic, and there was practically nothing we could do. Resuscitating a man who had open heart surgery a few days before, whose sternotomy wound opened, plus he had a chest tube that started draining large amounts of blood when chest compressions began. The bloodiest resuscitation I have ever been part of. Listening to a 90-year-old woman wail as her husband of 70 years passed away peacefully. Thank goodness. Several elder neglect cases. One person had a necrotic, unstitchable pressure wound in the sacral area that covered nearly their entire lower back. Their pelvic bones were clearly visible. Story 54. When I was around 10, I used to go out on the canal with my dad. We took the dogs and did some fishing. My dog ran off into the woods behind the canal and started going nuts, growling. My dad was a little behind me. I followed my dog and found a man hanging, with a blue swollen face, bulging eyes, and my dog chewing his shoes. Not a great mental image to carry with you for the rest of your life. Story 55. Very early morning drive on some back roads close to my home. Middle of winter, a good amount of snow on the road. Headlights caught a small deer in the middle of the road, seemingly kneeling in the snow. I pulled up to it and immediately noticed it had been hit by another car and left there. Both front legs were broken, and its nose was bleeding profusely. I had to lift it and carefully move it to the side of the road without causing more pain, then called local wildlife officers to come get it and put it out of its misery. I will never forget the noises it was making and how it did not have the energy to resist me when moving it. That was 12 years ago, and I still clutch my chest when thinking about it. Story 56. This morning, we took my Malamute in to be put down. He had a very distended belly. He looked like a potbelly pig despite always being lean and was drooling and lethargic. He was 10, so we weren't looking to prolong his life. He'd had a good one, and it was time. The veterinarian praised this decision, as he had a mass on his spleen and essentially all his blood was being fed through it. We were waiting for them to come back and euthanize him. The intravenous port was already in his back leg, and he was lying on a gurney that was really low to the ground. He was very out of it, basically mentally gone already. Suddenly, he looked at me with some glimmer of consciousness. I called his name and went over to pet him when suddenly he started whining, then howling, then screaming. He began to get off the gurney and then collapsed on the floor, screaming repeatedly. My husband held him and calmed him down, and the nurse came in and allowed him to pass. It broke my heart. It makes me feel like we let him go too late, but he was his normal self until this morning. I don't care if he was scared or if he was in a massive amount of pain. He was never the talkative type, and he had never screamed like that before. Whatever he was feeling, I failed him by letting him feel it. Story 57. Watching my dad pass away from cancer was devastating. He suffered for a long time. The day he passed, he was scared, confused, screaming in pain, and begging the doctors and nurses to let him die. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder afterwards. I have constant nightmares of watching him die over and over again to the point that I am afraid to go to sleep. Sometimes I still hear him screaming. It feels like I am always being haunted. He was an amazing dad. He never deserved any of this. I am glad he is not suffering anymore, but I miss him very much. When I lost him, I lost everything. Story 58. Emergency room story. A man and his wife get into a fight in his Jeep in a parking lot. The man decides to perform a burnout in the Jeep, loses control, and rolls the vehicle. The wife is not wearing a seatbelt and is ejected. The roll bar strikes her head severely. Paramedics collect her remains and place them on the gurney next to her head. She is taken to the hallway near the trauma rooms, where the man is being evaluated for his injuries. Story 59. I was having a bite to eat for breakfast at a corner store where they served coffee and pastries. I was 16 and we lived in Rio de Janeiro. I was about to get on the bus. The owner of the establishment swept out some old bread that had been on the floor into the street. A couple of kids from the slum jumped to grab the crusts of day-old bread from the gutter. Just feet away from me, the bus ran over one of them. Our eyes met as his life ended. You do not want to hear more details. It has been 50 years. I see and hear it every night in my dreams. Story 60. Moped versus semi-truck accident. Mostly human material, but the whole top of a skull with hair intact survived the impact. Story 61. I saw someone jump 8 stories from a hospital window to the ground below. I was right across the street on my break and witnessed it all, including the bounce. I was 16 years old. Story 62. I was walking home on a street in a quiet neighborhood when a lady crashed right in front of me. She crashed into a wooden fence with 2 horizontal pieces, and the top piece lifted up and went through her windshield, striking her head. She died immediately. I called emergency services and stayed to explain what I witnessed before going home. I thought I was immune to gore because of movies and exploring shocking content online, but seeing this in person and sitting silently with her, alone for about 10 minutes waiting for help, left a permanent mark on me. Story 63. I was 8 years old when my 5-year-old sister's car door opened, and she fell out. The whole event lasted no more than 5 seconds, but it lives in my mind as if it took an hour. I peered over the edge of our car seat and saw her still holding onto the car door jamb, her feet dragging on the road while Dad was trying to stop the car at 50 miles per hour. But it was too much and her fingers slipped. She was crushed under the back tire. It all happened so fast. Dad stopped the car, and we ran back to see blood coming from places it shouldn't. It was 28 years ago, but I still think about it all the time. Story 64. The lights of a speeding train flashed as I stood in front of it. I braced myself while screaming and crying. Somehow, some people pulled me out of the way at the last second. I am very sorry. I am in a better place now and have dedicated my life to helping people in that situation. I hope those people got help. Or the face of my sexual assault responder. The grin was like a Cheshire cat. Story 65 was not in real life but a video. An elderly man in Scotland was decapitated by a bus. A group of intoxicated young men found the head, thought it was a Halloween prop, and started kicking it around. One even tried a disrespectful act. I think about them often. Just imagine sobering up the next morning and realizing what had actually happened, and that the whole world has seen a video of it too. The man's family must have seen it as well. Truly horrific. Story 66. I had a friend house sit while my husband and I were out of town. They were wearing headphones listening to music and didn't notice my cat, whom I had for 10 years, got in the dryer. I came home to the slamming sound of her weight and pulled her lifeless body out of the dryer filled with completely dry towels that had blood all over them. It was the most horrific thing I have ever experienced, and it was a complete accident. I felt terrible for my friend. I was horrified thinking about what my cat experienced. I felt guilty because I made a stop for ice cream, and I thought if I hadn't done that, I would have made it home in time to prevent it. I had terrible post-traumatic stress disorder about it for years. Story 67. A man on a motorcycle was hit by a truck on the interstate. Someone pulled his body off the road and laid it on the grass at the side. My parents drove by slowly because traffic was at a standstill. My mother told us not to look, but of course I did. I wish I hadn't. I did not understand why the medics did not cover him with a tarp or something. Story 68. I witnessed a 6-year-old girl die when her father crushed the back of her skull against a wall. I saw her cry, look into my eyes, and then pass away. It broke me for a very long time. Story 69. Many years ago on Christmas Eve, I was 17 or 19, I can't remember now. I picked up my grandmother at the assisted living facility and headed to my parents' house for Christmas Eve dinner. Driving down the 2-lane county road, I saw a 4-door sedan in the distance fly off the elevated road and hit a tree. I stopped as I was the only one there. I ran to the car. A middle-aged woman was in the driver's seat and loopy but seemed unhurt. The car was smoking under the hood. I asked her what her name was and if she was hurt. I said we needed to get her out of the car. It might catch fire. No response. Another car pulled up and started dialing emergency services. I looked in the back seat and saw wrapped Christmas presents everywhere. Then I saw a small foot. Buried beneath the presents and wedged between the lower back seat and front seat was a toddler, about 2 to 4 years old. I yelled to the man who called emergency services and said there was a child. The child was not moving or responding. She could not stay in that position or in the car, so I pulled her out and put her in my lap. The man talking to emergency services was telling them to hurry loudly. She was taking very shallow, intermittent breaths even before I removed her, so I was very careful. Her color was not right. She was not moving. She was wearing a Disney princess shirt. I kept asking her to please tell me about it. What is her favorite Disney movie? She stopped breathing in my lap on that country road in the tall grass on Christmas Eve. So I just held her as I didn't know what to do. The fire department showed up 10 minutes later. They took her away by ambulance quickly. I knew she had passed in my lap. She had skin marks from where she slid under the seatbelt and had a gash on her head. I had vivid nightmares for weeks and rarely still do. I will never forget that day. I have since learned CPR because of that day. I was also very paranoid about my own children having the best properly installed child car seat. Story 70. Not me, but my uncle. In the late 1980s, he was an off-duty firefighter. The car in front of him crashed into a bridge and caught fire. A family of 5 was trapped inside, and the doors were jammed shut. The fire grew bigger and hotter, and it consumed the family as they screamed. He quit firefighting after that. Story 71. A construction worker my mom hired slit both his wrists and his neck while working in the basement apartment. He ran through the first floor yelling at the top of his lungs, ran up to the second floor, and nosedived into our backyard, which was concrete. There was blood throughout the house and a huge pool of blood where he landed. His head was cracked open and he was twitching moments after he landed. Story 72. My older brother died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I thought post-traumatic stress disorder only happened to soldiers, but I had to start medication and see a therapist. It has been a very long time and I no longer have the flashbacks, but my life was divided into before and after, not just because of the death but also because of the visual image. Story 73. Uncensored images of the Byford Dolphin incident. Although I admit the body parts had been torn into many pieces, combined with the fact that it was in black and white, it did not look very gory. Or maybe my mind has just been numbed. Story 74. I have seen cartel beheading videos and improvised explosive device videos and all that, but the thing that disturbed me the most was finding a link to thousands of closed-circuit television feeds, including people's webcams, nanny cameras, security cameras, and so on, just open for anyone to see. Click a link and it is someone's webcam, fully accessible without their knowledge. I started putting tape on all my webcams after that. Story 75. Grammar school. One of the class clowns thought it would be funny to hurt himself. The blood and the smell were something else. We did not have school for 2 days. I came to learn years later that they placed him with the special needs children, and then apparently his family moved away. Do not feel too bad. The person was also a bully. Story 76. I saw a man lying on the street in a pool of blood, his legs bent in unnatural ways, unconsciously gasping for air as he passed away. This was the result of the man being extremely intoxicated, wearing all black, and standing in the middle of the road at night while my roommate was driving me home from work. My roommate did not see him until he was hit by the windshield. The car hit him at full speed. Story 77. Watched my 34-year-old brother-in-law die of cirrhosis in 2023. Yellow, huge belly, emaciated, gasping and gurgling. My sister and I held his hand as he died in the hospital. I am still traumatized. Story 78. I am a former paramedic and worked in a city affected by drugs and gang violence. There are 2 incidents that stand out the most. One was an execution linked to gang disputes. Someone had killed a gangster, his fiancée, and their 11-month-old baby girl. The other was a car accident my emergency medical technician partner and I witnessed on the way back from a different call. It was a sport utility vehicle speeding along the highway. It clipped a guardrail, flew up a hill, flipped midair, ejected the driver through the windshield, and crashed on the exit ramp. The driver flew through the air and hit a lamppost like a rag doll. The driver was a mangled, jelly-like mess when we found them. When we looked in the vehicle, there was a car seat and toys. We conducted a thorough search to thankfully eliminate the possibility of a child being involved. Story 79. Not sure if it is the absolute worst thing I have seen, but I drove through Joplin just days after the EF5 tornado in 2011. I did the same after the more EF5 tornado in 2013. The damage was surreal. Felt like being somewhere haunted. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.